I'm Andrew Branstead,
Hi, and I'm Mitch Christensen.
and we're both seniors studying English education at the University of Northern Iowa. Mitch, you've got like a TESOL education minor.
Yeah, that's correct. So I would say, not necessarily specialized, but I know both areas of English. I have the literacy side with native speakers, is what we would say, and then I also look at English as a language to people who are not native speakers of English.
Today, what we're talking about specifically is how students feel about what is one of the most fundamental skills that everybody uses in school and in life too, I suppose. Our topic is how kids feel about reading.
Yeah, George Washington Carver Academy in Waterloo, Iowa is a middle school where we've been doing some work as part of Schwab Meacham's Lit Ed 4117 course.
A lot of what we do in college methods classes is very theoretical. This is maybe my opinion leaking in a bit. But the school, however, is where all that theory turns into practice. And a lot of times theory gets turned on its head, maybe. Once you pass through that office and into the lunchroom, well, it's the real world.
Tell me your full name real quick.
David Anthony Herman.
Diabiadi Torre Lewis Lumpkin.
All right. Hi, guys.
Hi.
Good to talk to you.
You too.
David and Diabian are both 13 years old and both students at Carver Academy. They were pretty forthcoming with us about their opinions about reading and literacy in school.
I don't really like reading like that. It's just something I'm good at, so I still do it.
So you were drawn to this particular topic. When we were sitting down in class, you sort of raised your hand right away and said, yeah, I'm going to grab that one. What made you think about the idea to talk about kids who hate reading for this podcast assignment? What drew you to it?
Sure. I think this goes back to probably one of my first field experiences through you and I. I was placed in a Waterloo school district, and I kind of met with this idea pretty early on that, it's pretty hard to get students into reading, especially assigned reading, and they quite often use that phrase, I hate reading.
Yeah.
And, as an English teacher, this is something that we need to have our kids doing. Just like in science, you practice science, and math, you practice math. Crazy, the idea to, practice reading in a literacy course,
It's interesting because reading is something that you can easily do. You mentioned like math or science, and sometimes in those classes they've got to go out of their way. As a teacher, you have to go out of your way to come up with a science experiment. But reading is just, hey, let's read. But we don't maybe do that as easily or as readily as we probably could for as available a thing as it is to practice. That's a great point.
Yeah, totally, I agree. Reading is something that we do all the time.
Right.
And I think students are maybe misidentifying what reading is, because they'll be on their phones looking at social media, and they're in fact reading, reading text messages, reading tweets, reading Facebook posts, but they don't see it as reading.
Would you say that maybe when they, oh, I hate reading or I don't like reading, which they both echo to maybe different degrees, is tied into reading at school? It's less I hate reading and more, man, I don't like reading when someone makes me do it at school.
Sure, and I think that even stems out of the fact that they're being forced to do something. I wouldn't say forced, because at the end of the day, they can not do it. Sure, their grade will suffer, but I think it's the idea that they are being told to do something. And as all humans, when we're told to do something, we generally don't like to do what we're being told.
It depends for me because I like reading my own books, like the ones I choose out, but some assignments, like books like that, I don't always enjoy, so I can't keep my attention with them.
To flip the script a little bit, I wanted to ask you, once we got into the actual conversation together, we just asked a couple of 13-year-olds, hey, do you like reading? So I'm going to ask you, do you like reading?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Is it different when someone makes you read?
Of course. It's definitely harder to crack open that tome of American literature and
Sure.
anthology, have to read this for class for discussion, but I see the value in it, and that of course I'm going to do it, and I also enjoy it once I get into it. But you have to get through that initial, I don't want to crack open the book, I'd rather read my own books that interest me.
My personal go-to story for that is Moby Dick, because I had to read Moby Dick for class. And it's weird because I wanted to read it, and I had started reading it prior to class, because it's one of those, I have this big list of books I should probably read, and that was on there, and I had gotten a good start, and I was enthusiastic, and as soon as it became an assignment, I thought, oh, this is great, I've already started it, and my reading motivation was greatly diminished just because it had been assigned to me. I had to find all kinds of tricks to get through it. I got the audio version to go along with what I was reading, because that book can be very slow and it can go in really weird directions. And I guess the moral of the story, to put my teacher hat on, is I love Moby Dick. I think it's a great book and I'm really glad I read it. But I would not for a minute tell anyone that it was an easy experience for me. It was hard to read. Harder because of the classroom environment, which I don't know what that means specifically, but I think there's an interesting thread there we could pull out.
Sure, I've got a good question for you then. So, what do your reading habits look like when you are assigned to read something, and then when you're reading just for fun? Do they differ greatly, or?
They do. I'm maybe atypical. I don't know. I'm very happy to abandon something if I'm not into it reading wise, because for me, I look at this huge body of work. When I came to college, as a non-traditional student at 37 when I signed, at 36 when I came to college, whatever I was. And there's so much stuff that I feel like I should have read. Like, oh, you haven't read this, you haven't read that. From canon stuff to popular stuff. And so for me, if I'm reading something and it's not clicking for me, I give it a little bit of an effort. I'll put it aside because there's something else I could be putting that energy toward. And obviously with an assignment, I make myself. And often that's rewarding. I mean, I will say that sometimes when I finish, or usually when I finish, I'm glad I read that. I'm glad that some external motivation made me get through it. And I wish I could maybe take a little more of that and put it into my personal reading so that I could achieve a goal I really have of reading more stuff that I haven't read.
And I think a lot of our strengths as English teachers is this knowledge that we've built of books that we've read. And I think that's definitely a strength that we can give to our students as well, through advice on what sort of literature they should be picking up, or they could be picking up.
I think there's a great opportunity for empathy there. Often as the teacher, you're seen as the gatekeeper of knowledge and the person who hands out the assignments. And I think students perceive that you do this easily, that, oh yeah, you just read books and for you it's easy. And it's not always easy for me. It's often not easy for me. And I think there's value in showing that with the kids. And then, of course, showing them the next step of, yeah, this was hard, but look, I also did it, and here's how it was rewarding for me.
We've talked a little bit about this idea, this topic of I hate reading, and some of our own personal reading habits. Perhaps it'd be interesting to talk about, looking at what these students had to say. What are your thoughts on some of the ideas, some of the opinions that they shared with us?
The thing that I took away, and I shared this with you when we did the actual interviews on the spot there in Carver, I remember saying that I was, surprised isn't the right word, I was really impressed with how aware both students were of their curriculum, of how it worked and why it did or didn't work for them. I imagine if you'd asked me before this, what do you think a kid who doesn't care for reading or doesn't identify as a reader would say about why they don't like reading? I figured I would get more emotional, kind of, I don't like it answers. I think with both students, their answers were, I don't like it because X, and that relates to my education this way. That was really eye-opening to me because I'm trying to be transparent as a teacher, and it was maybe encouraging to see how, yeah, they already kind of know what's going on behind the curtain.
Yeah, and another thing to point out is that these were 8th graders.
Yeah.
And we usually don't think of this kind of in-depth thinking and trying to understand your world around you until we get into high school. But these are 8th graders, and they're telling us about their learning and what they find is more valuable learning.
Would you say that the common theme that they expressed between them, like their big point of agreement, was that they wish they could read, have more choice in what they read?
Definitely. I know I asked them a question, if we gave students time in class to free read, I think both of them were very excited to the idea of having choice and being able to, kind of tone down, relax. But ironically, free reading, that's valuable time being spent right there because they're actually, spending time with words.
That would keep most people interested, because if you could pick a topic that you actually enjoy, that'll help you comprehend because you're actually interested in reading it.
And that'll keep people from talking, not getting it done, and failing class because they don't want to read that book, but they're forced to, and they'll rather read something they're comfortable with than not.
Well, I had a mentor teacher that would have them do small book reviews at the end of their books and say, this is what I liked, this is what I didn't like, would I recommend this to someone? Yeah. And they kind of had their own Goodreads site where they had student reviews and they were suggesting books to other students.
First of all, I think that's awesome. Anything to tap into a community idea or a shared experience. Because as a person who also likes to read, I mean, I asked you the question, but yeah, I love to read. But I love to read and then tell somebody about it. That's the best for me. That's one of the best parts. It's very solo. It's very solitary. But when I'm done, I want to say, "Hey, you should read this," or "Have you read this?" or "What'd you think of that?" And I think incorporating that into the classroom, but just the ability to share, I think that just is going to make them better and more enthusiastic readers because they can share or get recommendations.
And would you say that that this kind of love for reading deflates when you're around other people that say that they don't like reading? Because I imagine you have to have a good community base and strong support.
That's true. I don't know what to say to people who tell me that. I don't know how to react because, of course, I've had that conversation where, I love this book, and I don't really like to read books. And maybe that's my own blind spot and why I'm an English or a pre-service English teacher, why I'm drawn to that, because I like to read. But those are the kind of students we might have to help learn to love reading, or at least learn to do reading. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
Here's what's kind of interesting, though, that came out of not just the interviews that we did formally, but when we spoke with students sort of off the record about reading. And maybe you can verify this, but I talked to a couple of them. Both of them said they didn't care for reading. And when I said, "What's a book you like?" they immediately told me, "Well, I like this book." And so I think that I don't like to read or I hate reading is maybe not completely accurate. I think most students do have some kind of reading they've enjoyed doing.
Yeah, I agree with that. Before that we were doing this podcast here, we had to talk to some of our students and do kind of like a reading profile. And I had the same reaction with my student. His name was Amir. And he said he didn't like reading, and then all of a sudden he's telling me that he likes To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah.
That's a highly sophisticated book that talks about, racial issues.
You just maybe are more selective than others, or you need a good book, or somebody has to point you in the right direction of something that interests and speaks to you. And I think that's maybe where we as teachers should be going, is finding a way to point students toward, I guess, the right kind of books for them.
Mm-hmm.
That's a goal anyway.
I think so. I think a way that can inform our practice is that if we give our students a range of options, include books like To Kill a Mockingbird with other like-minded books. That way students can, have that freedom of choice where we want them in this general direction, but go ahead and choose the book that interests you the most from either the cover, the summary, the title, and then dive right in. And I think that we'd get a much better response out of our practice and our methods if we did something like this.
So in a perfect world, we'd strike a balance between student choice, plenty of time to do the reading, but also tying that reading into curriculum and into learning goals, and some of the required reading, I'm using air quotes, you can't see me, but some of the required reading stuff that's maybe from the canon that may be important to read, or if it's not important to read, whatever that term means, we still aren't going to have a whole lot of choice. We're going to have to say, "Hey kids, we're reading this, and let's make the best of it." And I don't want to give them that like a negative connotation, but honestly, I keep going back to a lot of things that I found tougher to get through, or maybe didn't grab my attention, were pretty rewarding in the end. If lots of people are telling you, "Hey, this is worth reading," it's probably worth reading.
Yeah, and I think students will respond well to that, that candid statement that, hey, you may not really enjoy this, but there are amazing things that will come out of this book and this learning. And, that's kind of like an area of respect right there, like you can respect the teacher's opinion, and then, you'll go from there.
I think most of them are like me, that we don't like reading, but we do it anyway because we have to. But it is some people like him, he likes to read sometimes. Yeah.
It seems like most people don't really enjoy most of the assignments, but when they get to choose their own book, they'll choose a certain book and they'll read it. But with certain assignments, they just won't bother doing anything sometimes.
A lot of ideas between the two of us. Anything that you'd want to end this with, or say to those negative readers or the teachers who are helping them?
Sure. I think this idea of choice stems out of this kind of environment that we want to create, of how do we engender in students this love of reading, especially if they have these sentiments of, I don't really feel like I like reading. And I think it's all about building this classroom climate, and it involves things like choice. It involves free reading time. And I think as literacy teachers, English teachers, that we have to kind of foster this environment. So give them time to free read. Let them choose what kind of books they want, and then hopefully out of that will stem a love for reading that's lifelong and lasting. Because like you said, we both love reading.
Yeah.
When did that occur? How did that happen?
I have no memory of it. Just there's no epiphany moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I want to thank Diavian and Davin, the two students who agreed to let us record them. And Carver Academy has been super cool to us. Appreciate them letting us kind of wander the halls and pick their students' brains whenever possible, and teachers' brains. It's been a pretty interesting experience getting right in there like that.
Yeah, sure thing. I'm sure they thought it was quite interesting us coming with our recorders like shady journalists.
Yeah.
Tell us what you think. What's the hot scoop in George Washington Carver Academy? But we also got to thank Dr. Meacham for getting us into George Washington Carver. You may not be able to tell so well by our voices, but we come from the dominant culture. We are two white guys.
Yeah.
And George Washington Carver is a predominantly minority school, and this kind of experience is just invaluable.
I couldn't agree more. It's been eye-opening at times, reaffirming at other times, and yeah, I really appreciate all the opportunities. Thank you for partnering up and doing this podcast with me.
Yeah, no, thanks, Andrew. This has been pretty awesome, and I think this discussion that we have can be really useful for pre-service teachers as well as teachers in practice right now to have these kind of discussions, and that they are meaningful and worthwhile.